Hey everyone, as always Jarek here, and welcome to my favorite VR title. I genuinely do like this game more than Half-Life Alyx. But I should clarify right at the very beginning that I don't dislike Half-Life Alyx. In fact, Alyx was the reason I got VR to begin with. If anything, I'm kind of a bit of a Half-Life fanboy. I played shooters before Half-Life 1, but Half-Life 1 was the game that really got me into shooters. And now look at me. My entire career is based off this genre. So to clarify again, I love the Half-Life franchise. It's easily my favorite franchise in video game history. So for me to be saying I like Boneworks more than Half-Life Alyx is saying a lot. I wanted to clarify this right at the beginning, because I'm going to be pretty negative towards Half-Life Alyx in this video. I also should clear up some recording things in this video. The Half-Life footage you're seeing was from the very first time I played Half-Life Alyx. This was before I got my VR legs. I didn't play Half-Life Alyx that much. I wasn't very good at the game, but that's a lot different than now. I've played through Alyx about 4 times now. I'm a lot better at the game nowadays, and I can play with continuous motion without any problem at all. This footage isn't really reflective as to how I play Half-Life Alyx, but I don't really have time to get more footage, so it'll have to do. As for the footage on Boneworks, I streamed this game, so I lowered the quality down to 720p 30fps just to ensure I didn't get any stuttering or frame rate issues. I wasn't too worried about it, but if these things do happen while you're streaming VR especially, it feels really bad. When you play the game, it will look a lot clearer than this, depending on your headset. I also didn't change the spectator mode. There is an action mode that increases the FOV and lets you see out of my right eye, but this requires a lot out of your computer, and since I was also streaming, it just wasn't possible for me to run this mode. I tried it, trust me, but holy hell, it just broke the game. Okay. Lag? Hello? That was a thing that happened. Holy. There's even a warning that says this is going to have a huge performance impact, so yeah, I went with the basic spectator mode. Unfortunately, you can't see out of my right eye with this game mode. When it comes to a headset, you have 2 different lenses in here that you see out of. I am going to be aiming out of my right eye, and this view just kind of does straight out of the middle. So when I'm aiming down sights, you only see bore. Keep that in mind, I am actually aiming down sights, you just can't see it. My headset is the Samsung Odyssey Plus, by the way, because I know people will be asking. Okay, all the disclaimers out of the way, let's actually talk about this game. People seem to have a love-it-hate-it relationship with Boneworks, and there's one really big reason for it, I believe. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when it comes to Half-Life Alyx? Maybe it's how well animated the Vortigaunts are, maybe it's the storytelling aspects, maybe it's how funny Russell is, maybe it's the graphics, the environment, how immersive the game can be. These are the first things that come to mind when it comes to Half-Life Alyx for me. However, the things that definitely do not come to mind is the combat. The combat loop in Half-Life Alyx is not exactly very engaging. Boneworks is the total opposite. You're definitely not going to be thinking of story or graphics when you think of Boneworks. You're going to be talking about how you can climb anything you want to or do whatever you want in the middle of combat. These games are almost fixated on 2 totally different things. And depending on what you want out of your game, you're probably going to heavily prefer Half-Life Alyx or heavily prefer Boneworks. For me, I tend to focus on the quote-unquote gameplay, and when I think of gameplay, I think of the combat loop and how deep that combat loop is going to be. That's what pulls me into games. So you can see why I would heavily prefer Boneworks. To be entirely honest, as much as I love Half-Life Alyx, it really did disappoint me in a lot of ways. There's no melee combat, there's no two-handed weapons, you can't climb anything, you can't even jump. You're just a floating pair of hands and a headset that just kind of scoots along the ground. Valve stayed very safe with VR. They didn't really experiment or try to do anything new. Their goal for Half-Life Alyx was to be an entry-level VR game. And they did that very well. But if you want something deeper out of your VR title, it's very lacking in that regard. I mean hell, Half-Life 1 has more weapon variety and more enemy variety than Half-Life Alyx does. I know it's difficult to compare a regular first-person shooter to a VR title, but I think you can get my point here. Alyx did not push this part of VR very much, because it requires a lot out of the player. Boneworks does not care. They are going to throw everything you want to do at you and just let the player figure it out. And because of this, I've seen some people be a little upset at it, saying it feels very janky or it gets them sick, and Half-Life Alyx is just a more fun experience for them. There's definitely a little bit of learning when it comes to the movement in Boneworks. To be honest, I started playing Boneworks before Half-Life Alyx. I played like one level, then Half-Life Alyx came out, I dropped it immediately, played through all of Half-Life Alyx and loved it, and didn't go back to Boneworks till about a month later. But when I did, I don't know why I ever stopped. I really enjoyed Boneworks, and I think that's the biggest problem. You need VR experience to enjoy Boneworks. It says that right as you open the game, this is for VR veterans only. But at the same time, I almost feel like this is a better Half-Life game than Half-Life Alyx. In Half-Life Alyx, if you look at something and go, can I do this? The answer is probably no. You probably can't experiment to the extent that you're thinking of. But when it comes to Boneworks, if I look at something and ask, can I figure this out? Can I do something different here? The answer is almost always yes. And that's where Half-Life started, pushing games forward, letting the player experience things in a new way, the way they wanted to. To those of you that haven't played Boneworks, you're probably very confused as to what the hell any of this means, so let me talk about Boneworks now, after I talk about another really cool project really quick. This is not a sponsor, keep in mind. This is something that I had a hand in. So recently one of my close friends and I made this. This entire map and all of the cards are custom made by a friend of mine known as LilFox15. This is a workshop item that you can download for Tabletop Simulator if you own that game. It's obviously based on Gen 2. I have a lot more Pokemon experience than Fox has, so most of these spaces on the board were written by me. To give you the too long didn't read description, this is basically Mario Party meets Pokemon. So yeah, a lot of love and work went into this. It took like 12 to 15 hours to make. There's a link down below in the video information to where you can download it. It is free if you own Tabletop Simulator, so please check it out. If enough people like it, maybe we'll make one for every generation. Sorry, I really wanted to plug that. Let's talk about Boneworks now. Let's cover Boneworks in the way I usually do, starting with the story.
Hey, so everyone's kind of freaking out over here. There's a rumor from security that somebody broke into the complex and coordinated a breach in Myth. I don't know why, or who would even know how, but I think it's an inside job.
Yeah, no one really cares about the story in Boneworks. That's not why you're playing it. It exists, kind of. You probably totally forget. The story is basically you're in a VR world as you're playing a VR game. Little cliche, but again, who really cares? That's not why you're playing Boneworks. Next, we'll talk about the graphics, and I've heard a lot of people complain that this game is just boring and samey all the way through, and they didn't want to play it because of that alone, which kind of makes my head spin and get really annoyed, but I kind of understand where they're coming from. The game isn't exactly a very deep game graphically. It doesn't look like Half-Life Alyx, but at the same time, it still ended up being an immersive experience for me, and I think a lot of that has to do with its fantastic music, which I've been playing in the background this whole time. The soundtrack is really underrated, and I clearly remember where these songs played in this game. But let's swiftly talk about the main thing that really matters here, the gameplay. Boneworks gets a lot of flack for being kind of janky, but there's a reason for that. They're trying to push VR forward, like in a way that no one else has. In Boneworks, you have an entire body, arms, legs, torso, everything, and you physically interact with the world around you. This can be a bit jarring. Things can accidentally push you around, and if you're not moving in real life yet you move in the game, and you're wearing a VR headset, that's a little weird feeling. But at the same time, I would prefer this over just being a floating pair of hands and a headset, even if this game was clearly not made for people with long arms. My issue is my arms reach a good 5 inches more than the arms in-game, even with the correct height setting. I really would like them to have some sort of extra setting that allows me to change my arm length. You wouldn't think this would be a big issue, but when you reach out to grab something and your arm in-game doesn't reach where it should in real life, there's a big disconnect there. And this is extra important because there's a lot of melee combat you can do. The fact that your body interacts with everything around you, including other enemies, allows you to do things you might not initially think of. You could box this guy in a regular way, dukes up as he says, or you can grab him by the head, drag him against the wall, pin him there, and punch him in the face until he fucking dies.
Give me that. Just beat the shit out of him. What are you gonna do?
But there's plenty of other melee weapons as well that are so satisfying. A quick swing to the head with a wrench is more enjoyable than anything I've experienced in any other VR title, and that sounds incredibly psychotic.
Let's brick him to death. Actually.
The same thing could be said about anything with a blade. Axes are super fun to use.
There we go. Now let's see him struggle to get through the door. You know what? Come here. Come here.
Although from what I've noticed with the melee weapons, the knives and the swords are so overpowered compared to everything else.
Whoa! More! What up, son?
But hey, if you don't want to use a regular melee weapon or your fist, you can instead grab a bottle, break that bottle, and use the sharp bottle to stab people. You can do this. You can interact with almost anything in this game in this sort of way. That's why I said if you look at something and ask, can I do this? The answer is almost always yes. The same thing can be said for the movement. You control it real time. You don't teleport, you actually physically jump and raise your legs. A lot of people do complain about your legs in Boneworks because you're mostly just controlling your arms, so to people it seems like your legs are just dangling below you. This is going to seem awkward at first until you realize that if you push down on the right analog stick you lift your legs, and if you push up you push them down. This is how you can climb on top of virtually anything. And once you're used to it, it's pretty good and not that bad. It opens up a ton of possibilities. I mean it when I say you can climb on virtually anything in this game, and this game wants you to. And oh boy, climbing things in VR is an experience that does not shine through on a 2D monitor. This really feels like you're hanging 3 stories up. If you're afraid of heights, this game may not be for you. Or maybe it is. Maybe this is great for exposure therapy, since you're not really at any risk. This is one of the things I remember more than anything else. The feeling of being up high, the feeling of heights, and the feeling of having to scale across them. This was more tense to me than the actual combat. And this is the stuff that is entirely missing in Half-Life Alyx. I know it's incredibly tense, and some people that have problems with heights may really not like this. But still, the fact that they pushed this, they allowed this into their game, makes me love it. This opens up a whole new way for players to express themselves that I don't really see in any other VR title. And trust me when I say these sorts of experiences get way more tense later on in the game. This game managed to make platforming fun for me. When you have to scale what is basically a 20-story building and you finally reach the top, the sense of satisfaction and accomplishment is something I can't say I've experienced in other games. The satisfaction is not because you overcame an enemy or figured out some video game. The satisfaction is more like something along the lines of it feels like you actually did that. The first time you play through this game, it will probably be mentally exhausting, and I say that in a good way.
Okay, here we go. We're already at the top. That's what we just climbed.
Anyway, let's move on to the guns. Unlike Half-Life Alyx, there's more than 3 weapons, and there are 2-handed weapons that you can use in this game. The biggest complaint I have is the holstering system, which seems to have a mind of its own whether it wants to work or not. You have 1 holster over each shoulder, 1 on your lower back, and 2 on your sides. The 2 on your sides are for pistols only, the 1 on your lower back is for mid-sized weapons like say MP5Ks, and 2 over your shoulders are for larger 2-handed weapons. And it feels really good just to holster one weapon, pull out another one, and keep blasting. When it works. You see, sometimes you go to holster your weapon and you just drop it. This happens a lot. And if you're having any performance issues, these problems happen even more. Boneworks is far from a perfect game. Like I said, I'll be the first to admit that. And this is definitely one of the problems, but when it works, it just feels so good. Anyway, what can I say here? You can use the guns in any way you want to. Headshots are especially devastating. The 2-handed weapons work exactly like 2-handed weapons would. Again, keep in mind, I am aiming down the sights, but I'm using the spectator mode that doesn't come out of my right eye so you're not seeing it. You can also dual wield if you want, which is awesome. Until you have to reload. There's no easy way to reload these things, you just have to holster one of them, do a manual reload, holster that one, then reload the other one. It's a lengthy process and it's just more effective to use an AR or a pistol or something. But damn, it feels really cool. Oh yeah, I forgot there's slow motion in this game. Which I also forget while I'm playing the game, because the button to activate the slow motion requires you to let go of the left analog stick so you can't move while you're doing it. In hindsight, I probably should have just rebinded that. Why didn't I do that? Man, I'm stupid. Anyway, yeah, slow motion is there, it's cool, but I find most people forget it exists. I should also probably point out that this game is very obviously inspired by Half-Life, as if it's not obvious from these jumping enemies right here. These enemies are clearly robotic headcrabs, but I do find them more fun to fight than the headcrabs in Half-Life Alyx. Keep in mind, Boneworks came out before Half-Life Alyx did, so the fact that you can pull them off your head or catch them in the air then kill them with a melee weapon is something that Alyx hadn't done yet, and still didn't really do anywhere near as well as Boneworks did in my opinion. It's a lot more exhilarating to deal with these enemies than the headcrabs in Half-Life Alyx. Probably because these enemies pose more of a threat than the headcrabs being a little bit slow and awkward in Alyx. And again, with there being no melee weapons, that totally erases some of the fun you could get out of the headcrabs anyway. Smacking these things out of the air with an axe feels so fun. In fact, just stabbing things in general in this game makes a really good noise and is more satisfying than it should be. I'm not a murderer, I swear. Anyway, I think you get the point. Boneworks pushes VR forward in a way that Half-Life Alyx did not. Half-Life Alyx played it very safe because again they wanted to be an entry point for people to get into VR. Boneworks wants to be for VR veterans, for people to really push what they can do with the platform. And we haven't seen another game do that in a way that Boneworks has since. I'm really looking forward to the next game we get that tries to do what Boneworks did, because I had way more fun with this game than any other VR title by far. I don't care if it's a janky, weird experience. The fact that they let you do these things is way better than keeping it safe. It's more engaging than just being a pair of hands and a headset floating across the ground. I don't value graphics and story more than I value gameplay. And to be honest, I don't think other people should either. I feel like we've come to a point where video games are expected to be more than just a video game. People expect them to be experiences. And I don't know when we got to a point where people scoff at video games being video games. Look, there's nothing wrong with an immersive storytelling experience, that's fantastic too. But there's also nothing wrong with a game just being fun video game stuff. Doom Eternal is a great example. If you say you don't like Doom Eternal because of the story, you miss the point entirely. And the same thing could be said for Boneworks. If you say you don't like Boneworks because of the story and the graphics, you're not playing the game for the right reasons, and you missed what the game was even trying to do. I could talk more about what else Boneworks offers. They do have a horde mode, which is interesting, and they do have a sandbox mode, which I find to be really fun, but I think I'll let you figure these out on your own if you decide to play these games. You get the point I'm trying to make by now. So that should sum up everything I have wanted to say. Thank all of you guys that join me over on Twitch when I stream this game. My Twitch is twitch.tv/JarekTheGamingDragon. If you subscribe, you get to see my videos ahead of time. Thank all of you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.